A lot of research for this particular wave report, um, and got a nice sleep in this morning after a late night Dungeons and Dragons session. You guys can see the antics over on my Twitch page from last night. A shout out to my gamer friends for another fun session, especially to Ted, who put together a wonderful re-rendering of the Icewind Dale video game as Dungeons and Dragons, which we are having fun playing through. And also shout out to Lauren, who's done some beautiful doodles for the game. So good, fun stuff. All right, so getting to the wave report today. And I am Robert Scribbler, your wave reporter on all things waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle. I leverage my expertise, I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit, my expertise as a threats analyst, as a surfer for the past 44 years, and as a writer on the issue of climate change consistently since 2012. So I am putting all those things together for you guys to produce this wave report. And I've been a resident also of the East Coast off and on throughout my lifetime. I have lived in Virginia Beach and traveled to the Outer Banks also throughout my life. So all of these things in service to you and to provide you with accurate reports on the surf and also insight into how climate affects our weather and how the weather has tended to evolve and change with our changing climate and how that weather impacts the East Coast, as well as how the climate impacts the East Coast, particularly this thin strand of overgrown sandbars that so many love and enjoy, called the Outer Banks. All right, excuse me. Now I'm getting all scratchy in the throat. But for today, we're gonna go big. We're gonna talk waves and winds. Particularly, we're going to talk waves and warm winds. We're going to start out with waves just to give you guys a little bit of a local focus at first before we do go big. So right now, the wave conditions in the near offshore environment of the Outer Banks are such that we are seeing swells coming in from the northeast. These swells are about 3 feet tall for the more northerly beaches, and they get a bit taller as you head further south in the 5 foot range. And these swells are lining up with the coastline so that we are mostly seeing waves in the 2 to 3 foot range breaking at most beaches. So these are good waves at the beaches, rideable waves. The winds are relatively gentle out of the northeast. Waves are not likely as hollow as they were yesterday, but nonetheless likely very rideable with those 2 to 3 foot waves coming in, probably not too choppy. So decent quality surf. We did get actual relatively good quality surf yesterday. Unexpectedly warm conditions, at least for me. We had a strong northwesterly wind, but the temperatures were upper 60s. A lot of people went to the beach yesterday and enjoyed the beach. I saw a few people just hanging out at the beach with their shirts off, and you got that warm sunlight streaming in, so it feels warmer than the upper 60s. We might have even had some temperatures around 70 yesterday in certain locations. And for today, it's worth noting that the temperature readings are above what was predicted in most of the weather forecasts. Most of the predictions were for temperatures in the lower 50s and upper 40s, and we're actually seeing temperatures, I'd say, averaging about 2 to 4 degrees above predictions, with temperatures in the middle 50s. So not as warm as yesterday, but nonetheless warmer than expected. So um, some relatively nice conditions down there at the beach for early March. Not to say that this is summertime safari weather, but if you do want to get down to the beaches, the air temperatures aren't so terrible. Ocean water temperatures ranging from the lower 50s to like north around Jeanette's Pier to around 60 there at Buxton. So decent conditions on the coastline. I'm giving you this sampler right now at the local level to just presage what is going to be a big discussion. All right, so let's get to the weather maps. And right now we have the passage of a front leaving the east coast clear of clouds. We've got some northwesterly winds coming in over parts of the northeast here. And here on the other banks, the winds are turning in from the northeast, northeast primarily, bringing in the northeast swell. The storm is now well offshore, and we've got some stormy conditions out in the central US and along the west, but not too crazy stormy for the United States. It is worth noting that areas of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Oklahoma, and Kansas are seeing some strong winds coming down off the mountains, and this is increasing fire hazard for this portion of the United States. But overall, precipitation-wise, things aren't too crazy right now. Looking at the enhanced cloud tops, you can see the stream of clouds coming in to the west coast, a storm swirling over Oregon, bringing some coastal rains and mountain snows and some wintry weather up across parts of Montana and the Dakotas, with much of the rest of the United States remaining pretty clear with a storm exiting the northeast. Getting down to the National Weather Service radar, we do see some of the alerts up for winter weather advisories for the mountains out west. We see this large swaths of pink and orange here in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Kansas, and Colorado. That's in association with those red flag warnings with the increased fire hazard. And we have some impulses moving across the Montana and the Dakotas, mostly winter weather up here up in the north. We've got small craft advisories. It looks like some gale warnings up for the western Great Lakes. And for the U.S. West Coast, looks like we've also got small craft advisories up as storms continue to come off the Pacific. Out in the Northeast, we've got small craft advisories and looks like maybe a gale warning or two. Let's see. That looks like a gale warning. Yep, gale warning or two as the storm exits the U.S. Northeast. But here in the Outer Banks, another clear day with beautiful blue skies and good surf. All right, so going a little bit broader now, looking at the 7-day forecast for precipitation, we do have a tendency for storminess over the U.S. West from Central California on northward. This has been the trend for most of the last few weeks. And we also have a trend for storminess here in Oklahoma, Texas, parts of Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, and parts of northern Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. This region has been under the gun for spates of severe weather and heavy storms, and that seems to be the case for the next 7 days as well, according to NOAA's quantitative prediction forecast. Looking off the coast here, we do have a tendency for nor'easter formation off the U.S. East Coast, and we'll just have to keep an eye on that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Now, I am going to get back to the local level before we get into our broader discussion. So, talking about the waves. So presently, I did provide an overview for you, but we're going to do our local observations. So getting down to the coastline at Jeanette's Pier right now, waves are in the range of 2 to 3 feet, with a primary swell coming in at 7 seconds and a secondary swell coming in at 14 seconds. That primary swell about 3 feet, maybe even 3.5 feet down there at Jeanette's Pier, coming out of the northeast, so lining up nicely to the shore. Probably some pretty good waves down there right now. I haven't been down for a local observation, but we'll get down there at some point today and get you guys an observation. Right now, winds are out of the north-northeast at 11 miles per hour. That is an onshore flow. Air temperature is about 53 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than expected. Ocean water temperature is 52 degrees. Ocean water temperatures across the Outer Banks have remained a bit cool as we've had spates of westerly winds pushing the warm waters offshore and bringing in that upwelling. Whenever the warm waters get pushed offshore, the Labrador current has more opportunity to invade and make those water temperatures colder, and that's kind of what's happened. But 52 degrees, I know this is going to sound a little nuts, but that's not too crazy cold. We've seen temperatures down into the range of around 46 in February, so things have warmed up a little bit offshore there at Jeanette's Pier. You definitely are still going to need your cold water gear, so don't get me wrong about that. Weather conditions for today expected to be sunny, high in the mid 50s. Now heading on down south to Rodanthe, we've got wave heights also in the range of about 2 feet. The swell is effectively the same, but the beach turns a little bit more to the east so that the swell is coming in a little bit more at an angle, not getting that direct facing from the swell. Swell height is about the same, but again, with that angle, you get less wrap around and less height to the swell, to the waves that are coming in. And so the waves are around 2 feet there at Rodanthe right now. Primary swell at 7 seconds, secondary swell at 12 seconds. Winds out of the north-northeast, which is a cross-shore flow, maybe a little bit of an onshore component, 16 miles per hour, a little bit stronger there. Air temperature is much warmer than expected down there at Rodanthe at 59 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the local observation post that I'm using. And then ocean water temperature is not much warmer than Jeanette's at 54 degrees Fahrenheit. And forecast for the day, sunny and high near 60. Moving on down south to Buxton. We're going to look at Buxton here for our last location for our observations. And right now, wave heights are in the range of 2 to 3 feet. I've got a little asterisk because we've got a larger swell coming in from the northeast. They're just larger swells out here off Buxton tends to be. It just the way the airs and the waters and the currents combine, Buxton just tends to get larger swells, larger waves. So we've got 2 to 3 foot waves right now breaking on the shore. The northeast swell is coming in at 4.5 feet in the near offshore environment. This is a 7-second swell. That's wrapping around to produce those 2 to 3 foot waves at the coast, maybe a little bit bigger. Secondary swell coming in at 14 seconds. Winds are out of the north-northeast, which is a cross shore with a little bit of an onshore component, 14 miles per hour. That's light to moderate winds. Air temperatures right now in the range of 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and as with most locations, that's warmer than expected. Ocean water temperatures down to 60 degrees, with those warmer waters having been blown offshore a bit. Weather conditions for today at Buxton expected to be sunny with a high in the mid to upper 50s. All right, so I said we were going to go big. Let's talk big. One of the things that I want to talk about is this feature that I did talk about in a previous OBX wave report, but we're gonna dive into this just a little bit more. And it has something to do with potential storminess for the Outer Banks in mid-March. Now, I'm not certain if we are going to experience a powerful nor'easter in mid-March, nor are the weather models. But there is some loading in the system, kind of like the loading of a spring, that could produce severe weather. And the ingredients that are necessary for a severe nor'easter in our region would be cold, unstable air swooping down from the north, getting tangled up with warm, moist air over the Gulf of Mexico and North Atlantic. And the North Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico are much warmer than normal, providing more lift that could help to trigger powerful storms when mixed with a cold, unstable air mass. And for this air mass to move south, there's a couple of ingredients that need to come into play. And the first is that the jet stream needs to produce this big dip, and the polar air needs to be displaced. And I'm not saying that these are the typical traditional ingredients for a nor'easter. In the past, we've tended to have more of a like a flat, fast storm track, and and so this kind of combination, I would say, and of course you would probably want to talk to a professional meteorologist to confirm this, is it's not necessarily typical, but it's one of the loading mechanisms that can happen for severe nor'easters in a world that is changed by the climate crisis, in a world where we have warmer than normal oceans and warm air invasions of the Arctic. So this is the scenario that we're looking at for as a potential for mid to late March. And it's not necessarily, I would say, likely to happen, but it's something that could happen given the dynamics. And what we are seeing right now is an invasion of warm air coming up through the Bering Sea, an invasion of warm air coming up through Baffin Bay and over Greenland. And this warm air, these two warm air invasions are expected to meet over the Arctic and pinch off in a pool of cold air over the continent. And the question really is how far south is that pool of cold air going to go? Does this cold air have enough instability to trigger a major storm system over the US Southeast and off the eastern seaboard? And do those elements line up in such a way to produce a nor'easter of serious force or intensity? And those are big questions. And right now in the models, we're seeing some potential, but we're not seeing consistency. But I do want to talk more about this warm air invasion because it's a climate change related feature, and it's something that I believe that we should be kind of paying attention to from the standpoint of weather and climate. So let's dig deeper into this. And so right now we've got this crazy warm air invasion over Greenland. And the warm air invasion over Greenland is associated with these warm winds and warm storms moving from south to north over the North Atlantic. Now, if you're a surfer and you are paying attention to sites like Surfline or Magic Seaweed or the global wave monitors, you'll have noticed that there's been a lot of news lately about big waves heading toward Europe. And where are the waves coming from? They're coming from these powerful warm storms that are moving from south to north over the central North Atlantic, smashing into Greenland. And it's a conflict between this warm air moving north and the cold air over Greenland that is producing these powerful storms out here in the central North Atlantic that are producing these massive swells out here for Western Europe. And last week we had some pretty amazing swells stretching from Ireland through France down into Portugal. And for mid to late March, again, we've got a potential for big storms to produce like a very large, long period swell for the North Atlantic here for a large swath of Europe. And Europe now is getting turned into kind of a big wave spot by these big North Atlantic warm storms. They're invading from south to north, smashing into the Greenland ice. And you're getting the intensification of those lows right off of Greenland as warm is forced right next to cold. And it's that conflict of those air masses that's spinning up those powerful storms. Now, I've described a lot here while looking at a temperature anomaly map. And why am I doing this? I wanted to show you how crazy warmer than normal it is because these warm storms are smashing into this icy region of the world. And so what has happened as a result of these warm storm smash, you see these areas of like red and kind of white. That's very warm temperature anomalies. That's showing us that temperatures are in the range of 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal for this region of the Arctic in Baffin Bay, in parts of northern Canada, and in parts of Greenland. And I'm just going to get back to the temperature monitor at the surface. And I just wanted to show you this location. This is basically a March location on the west coast of Greenland, far, far to the north, where temperatures are almost above freezing. There's a big glacier right here. There's a frozen ocean right here, and yet, um, this is one of the supposed to be coldest regions of the world, especially for this time of year, and yet it's almost above freezing. And we can go to places much further to the south, say, for example, here in British Columbia, where it's colder than it is in Greenland, right near the ice sheet. And that's not normal. That's completely abnormal. And so that we've got this crazy warm air invasion, and just across Baffin Bay, we've got similar conditions near freezing temperatures over a region that for this time of year shouldn't be anywhere close to a thaw. So yeah, pretty crazy. So we've got this crazy warm air invasion moving up through Baffin Bay. And then we've got this other warm air invasion. I'm going to point it out. It's not as intense as far as like anomaly scale, anomaly meaning variance from the norm, but nonetheless, you can see it, this warm air plug heading up through the Bering Sea and into the Arctic. And these two plugs of warm air are going to meet. One is heading from across the North Atlantic with these warm storms injecting this warm air up into Baffin Bay and Greenland and northern Canada. And the other one is with this long period warm wind, south to north wind, blowing up through the Bering Sea. And the Bering Sea winds are going to move here across northern Alaska and northern Canada and the Arctic Ocean adjacent to that. And the warm winds over Baffin Bay are going to move across the Canadian archipelago and out here into the seas off of Canada in the Beaufort, and it's just going to shake hands. These two are just going to join together. They're going to shake hands. And when they do, the cold air that was over here is going to get pushed out onto the continent. And you can already see this happening. You can see these colder than normal temperatures here over in Alaska. And this pool here in Alaska, eastern Alaska and Canada, and over the Canadian Rockies for the most part now, it is expected to move south and east. And the question is, how far is that cold, unstable air going to move south? Because that determines where the line of conflict is between the hot and the cold, and where the storms are going to fire up between that cold air mass to the north, and then we just know that there's this warm air mass over the Gulf of Mexico that's just kind of waiting for it. And we know that there's this warm air mass off the US eastern seaboard that's kind of waiting for it. So if it gets pinched off and it moves south and east, the question is how far? And if it gets far enough and comes into conflict with these air masses in a certain kind of way, then we could see a strong nor'easter here off the US East Coast in mid to late March. Okay, so let's look at the tendencies. I'm looking at tendencies over the next week, over the next 7 days. And looking at a weather map provided by Karsten Haustein. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And this is another anomaly map. Very interested in anomalies, differences between hot and cold. This is not a direct measurement of temperature. It's a measurement of variance from the climate norm. And this is 7 days from now, a forecast for 7 days from now. And where's the hot and where is the cold, or hotter than normal and colder than normal? Well, we've got hotter than normal or warmer than normal conditions here for this portion of the Arctic, and colder than normal conditions for parts of the Pacific Northwest and central northern US. And still warmer than normal conditions expected to hang on for the US East. Now, for the Climate Prediction Center models, there was an expectation that these warmer than normal conditions over the US Southeast would get kicked out. And we're just going to have to see about that as we get into mid-March, because it seems to me that there's more and more of a tendency for these warmer than normal air masses to hang on here in the US East. And so we'll have to see about that. We'll see if the cold air kicks out the warm air in the east. And if it does, then we've got more of a potential for a nor'easter as the battle zone moves off the eastern seaboard into the North Atlantic. So we shall see about that. But at the 7 day time period, it doesn't appear that this has happened yet. We still have the trough tendency more for the US West Coast and parts of the Rocky Mountain regions. So the storms would tend to line up over, Texas, where they've tended to, over Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi River Valley, and that kind of dipole anomaly, with cold being over, like, say, for example, Montana, and warm being over the US Southeast. Now I'm going to advance this to the next frame so that you can see the tendency for the 7 days predicted. And this really pops. This really shows you where that warm air invasion is expected to go. You see this much warmer than normal air temperatures over Greenland, the Canadian archipelago, and over the Bering Sea, and just regions just to the north of that in the Arctic, just this big bowl of warmer than normal air with that pinch of colder than normal air over the so we'll say northwestern portion of North America, with the exception being Alaska, seeing much warmer than normal temperatures with those warm air invasions. And so that blue, those shades of blue there, for us to get like a major nor'easter here on the East Coast, and not to say that we wouldn't get it in this kind of scenario, but the tendency would be less likely for a major nor'easter on the East Coast with this cold air here. The cold air would tend to have to displace further south and place the battle zone between hot and cold right over that Gulf of Mexico, Atlantic Ocean region. And don't get me wrong, we do also have this pool of unstable air here offshore. So we're still likely to get some storms offshore, but in this kind of scenario, not as likely to be super crazy intense. Now, if for the next 7 days following this 7 day period, so this is from March 5th through March 12th, if March 12th through 19, we see this cold pool moving more over here into the central US, and the battle zone shifting more toward the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean region, then I think we would be under the gun for more in the way of severe nor'easters. All right, so now we look at this. Now we look at this question provided, and the answers are provided to us by the Climate Prediction Center. According to their models and what they're looking at, the cold pinch does get into the central US, and that might set the stage for some severe storms moving through the Gulf of Mexico and up the eastern seaboard. Looking at the 8 to 14 day precipitation outlook, we don't really see any tendency for like major crazy severe precipitation for the US Southeast, but there is a tendency for above normal there. And with that cold air mass coming into conflict, I would think that some powerful storms might fire up over the Gulf of Mexico and the US East Coast. So we're just going to have to see about that. Now, I'm not certain if this 8 to 14 day outlook is correct. This is a longer range forecast, correct in the sense that it will necessarily 100% be borne out. But the models are pointing toward this cold air mass continuing to sink toward that warmer than normal air over the oceans. And okay, so this is my long talk to talk about why we might, and I just say might with the big old grain of salt, might see a strong nor'easter come mid-March. Now let's get closer to the present time. I do want to show you the convective outlooks, and right now for today, there's not really too much in the way of severe weather forecasts, so I think that's all I'm going to say about that, but I did want to show that to you. And this before we get to the global forecast system model predictions for the next 10 days or so. Let's see if this model has loaded. Yes, it looks like it has. Okay, so the most recent model has loaded. We're going to go ahead and run this. This model is loaded at 12 o'clock Zulu on March the 5th, that being today. And let's just look at these storms and the way that they're expected to form. So as we get into Tuesday, we have a storm running in through the Great Lakes. Here on the East Coast, things remain pretty clear as we get into Tuesday. But then there's a little bit of a dip, a little bit of a trough that starts to form off the U.S. East Coast that sucks all the impulse out offshore, and we get some northeasterly winds by midweek, some larger waves, and nor'easter forming here out offshore. But nothing too close to the coastline, nothing too severe, although we do expect the waves to pump up here in the Outer Banks on Wednesday and into Thursday. And then the nor'easter moves offshore further by Thursday, although we still get the northeast winds on Thursday. And then as we get later in the day on Thursday, we get a storm system in the central U.S. that moves north and east, bringing winds up from the south and a stormy impulse that comes through most of the southeastern US with some rains and some southwesterly winds. And then this impulse moves offshore by Saturday. And by Saturday, we get another coastal low starting to form. Again, nothing too crazy, but nonetheless, a nor'easter, maybe even a gale type event here on the Saturday the 11th and Sunday the 12th. And then this particular system not lingering for too long, heading offshore on Sunday, but nonetheless leaving behind some northeasterly winds. And then as we get into March 13th, we get another coastal low forming, starting to form late on the 13th and early on the 14th, forming right off the Outer Banks. Not a very strong coastal low, but could be interesting. Lingers through Tuesday, the 14th, and then gets sucked up into an impulse that is heading off toward the U.S. Northeast with a double barrel low. Looks like a potential major winter storm event by mid-March there for the U.S. Northeast. And that low kind of goes into retrograde a little bit and then transfers energy offshore into those warmer waters, and then that low in turn heads offshore. And then as we get later into the model, we get that sink in the jet stream with these lows starting to come in from the northwest and heading to the southeast and then tapping into those warmer Atlantic waters with energy transferring offshore again and a coastal low forming again as we get later on into the model. And then at the very tail end of the model, we have a stationary front offshore and lows forming in the stationary front offshore. So nothing major showing up in the models for severe nor'easters yet. And this is, I guess, a little hopeful in the sense that we don't yet see that tendency again and again and again after, model after model after model run for severe nor'easters forming. But nonetheless, what we do see is a tendency for coastal lows to form and for storminess to focus here off the U.S. southeast coast. And we'll keep an eye on that as we progress, because with that cold pinch of air moving south, projected to move south, there's a potential for this collision of air masses to produce some interesting and powerful storm systems. And I promised myself that I wouldn't show you the ocean temperature map, but you know what? I want to. So let's go down to the oceans and look at the ocean temperature anomaly map. And just show you the sea surface temperatures here in the Atlantic Ocean. I'm going to zoom out. We're going to go big. It is much warmer than normal at the ocean surface in the Gulf of Mexico. It is much warmer than normal at the ocean surface for pretty much all of the North Atlantic. So any cold tangle of air that comes swooping down is going to smash right into that warm air mass over those ocean surfaces. That those ocean surfaces pumping out more moisture, more lift, more convection for any instability to feed off of to form powerful storm systems. So the models aren't predicting anything major yet, and though I can't say with any certainty at all whether or not there will be a major nor'easter in March. What I will say is some of the ingredients are there. Um, there's that cold air moving south, and there's that much warmer than normal ocean surface that can provide some major fuel for those storms. So an analysis of ingredients and base conditions. We'll just have to see if the storms form, and we'll have to listen to our local meteorologists and our national meteorologists and experts and weather experts as times progress. All right, so now let's get back to waves. And we've done a long, in-depth analysis at the OBX wave report today. We do love to do the analysis because I'm an analysis fiend. I'm an analysis nerd. Um, Most surfers actually are because they love to analyze the waves and try and figure out when the waves are going to be good. And it takes a lot of knowledge of oceans and weather and just dynamics to do that. Some of it intuitive, some of it scientific. And right now, in the near offshore environment, we got those 3-foot swells coming in from the northeast. I'm going to advance the wave model to give you guys an idea of what the waves are expected to look like over the next few days. So today, good waves. Tomorrow, looks like the swell is expected to remain from the east in the 3.5 to 4.5 foot range for the east-facing beaches. And then as we get into Tuesday, we get some southwesterly winds. Looks like they blow the waves offshore a little bit. But you know, I don't know. We might still have some decent waves near the coast. I didn't expect to see decent waves yesterday, and we did. So we might have some decent waves near the coast in the 1 to 2 foot range, despite the swell being blown offshore on Wednesday. And then as we get into Thursday, the like a nor'easter forms offshore. We might even get some near gale force conditions or gale force conditions here in the Outer Banks with woof. Yeah, looks like potential gale force conditions here in the Outer Banks on Wednesday, as we get into the day on Wednesday. And wave heights in the significant wave heights in the range of 9 to maybe even 11 feet in the near offshore environment as we get a coastal storm forming offshore here on Wednesday. So rough day on Wednesday. Then as we get into Thursday, the waves fall down a little bit, but we still have some big waves on Thursday in the 6 to 7 foot range. And I don't think we can tease this out into Friday, but I'd be willing to bet that the waves tend to fall down a little bit more as we get on into Friday with that swell coming in from the east. And then again on Saturday, we're expected to see stormy conditions with the waves pumping up again. So a comprehensive view of the larger northern hemisphere weather conditions, which may be contributing for a tendency for storminess off the US East Coast for March. And we do have that tendency in the models for storminess. When I talk about major nor'easters, I'm talking about bomb cyclones with we'll say in the 970, maybe 960, maybe 950 millibar range. We don't see that in the models yet, but some of the ingredients are there. So we're going to keep a weather eye to it. And here on the Outer Banks, nor'easters are a big deal. So we don't want to neglect the potential for nor'easters here in March under the conditions of a changing climate where the oceans are warmer than normal and provide more fuel for powerful cyclones, and where those warm air invasions of the Arctic can create an abnormal displacement of cold air to add instability, weather instability in the middle latitudes, which is where we are here in the Outer Banks. So thank you for joining me for this session of the OBX Wave Report. We have certainly discussed all things waves, weather, and climate. And at the end, as I always do, I'm going to implore you guys to please do everything you can to help speed the transition to clean energy. The clean energy being wind, water, solar, and electric vehicles. And this is how we tamp down and eventually halt the burning of fossil fuels. And in doing that, we can save our coastlines for those who live there now and enjoy these coastlines now and for future. It's go time when it comes to climate. And if I were to say anything else, I would be irresponsible. I know for some this is maybe not the most happy or comforting of messages. And But I guess what I want to say is that for me, it is a hopeful message. It is a happy message because the truth is happy and hopeful because it provides us with a vision of where we can go um, and how we can make our best future together. So thank you for joining me for this session of the OBX Wave Report. And